Rayora's slender tail twitched with impatience, swishing through the air in jerking, uncoordinated movements. The 2.2-meter canid-like Pumanti woman had a fur coat with markings that made her look remarkably similar to a maned wolf from Earth. However, that is where the similarities ended. 2 large pointed ears stuck out of the top of her head, with 2 smaller ears slightly down either side. Her slit orange eyes looking at nothing as she let her thoughts wander while waiting. Instead of Pumanti having noses on the end of their snout like many other species, Pumanti had nasal slits that looked like thin lines, starting about halfway to the end of their snout. Their slits continue back along the snout, following the curvature where their snouts meet their faces, and ending just below the eyes. Twin curved incisors swept down from their upper jaws, too large to be contained within their mouths. Currently, Rayora was standing in the waiting room of the local Office of Species Integrations. She had received a message from her caseworker requesting she come in for a meeting regarding the human that she was sponsoring. The message had been vague, stating that something had been brought to their attention that needed to be discussed. It gave virtually no hint as to what that something could possibly be, only that they apparently thought it was urgent enough that they had managed to schedule the meeting for that same day. That really hadn't helped her nerves any. Humanity had only joined the galactic scene a few standard years ago. Very quickly, the galaxy learned that their newest members were insatiably curious creatures. First contact almost ended terribly for them. A small scientific scouting ship of theirs had been discovered on the surface of an uncolonized planet within Drexy space. When the first contact team arrived, they nearly shot the primates when they all but sprinted to the first contact team. The only thing that stopped the meeting ending in bloodshed was the Drexy ambassador, who ordered everyone to stand down. He later made the now infamous comment regarding the first meeting with humanity. "I knew they meant us no harm almost immediately. How could they? Their eyes were lit up with wonder and happiness like a hatchling who had just been given a shiny new bauble." As is standard after a first contact meeting, the governments of various species made sponsorship programs in direct partnership with the United Terran Front's government. This allowed humans to begin to integrate into galactic society before the long and tedious process of officially adopting their species into the Pan-Galactic Alliance was finished. These sponsorship programs also allow governments to directly interact and gauge how the humans behave in various scenarios, and get a better idea of how their species will fit into galactic society as a whole. The Pumanti government, after learning that humans were pack-based social creatures like them, took on more than twice the standard number of sponsor requests. Just a few short weeks later, the program was declared a resounding success. The humans that had arrived on planet nearly effortlessly blended into Pumanti society. They formed extremely strong and healthy bonds with their respective packs, and their packmates had nothing but praise to say about their newest members. Rayora's ears shot back up as her reverie was interrupted by the office door opening, as a tall Pumanti man stepped out. His coat was mostly white with light grey streaks and splotches, indicating that his bloodline originated in the Arctic region.
"Rayora, good to see you. I trust everything has been going well? How is Jason handling things?"
Lornir asked, as he waved her into his office. His voice was warm, like he was speaking to an old friend, and it helped to relax some of the worry she had over the situation.
"Good to see you too, Lornir,"
Rayora replied, as she stood before making her way into the office, the door clicking shut behind her as she entered. It was a simple office with space decorations. A few photos hung on the walls, showing various white-pelted Pumanti. A model of the planet sat on the desk, along with Lornir's data slate. 2 chairs faced a large, dark wooden desk, and a more fancy chair sat behind it, which Lornir had made his way to. She picked one of the 2 chairs, and they both sat.
"Everything has been going well,"
she finally replied, her voice cheerful. Jason is good. He seems to almost always have a smile on his face. It took him a while to learn to not show his teeth when smiling, and he still but slips up every once in a while, but other than that, he's learning the culture quite fast. Lonier chuckled at that, his ears flicking with an indication of satisfaction.
That's wonderful to hear.
The smile seems to be the most challenging aspect of humans, for everyone across the galaxy. Why a species would ever evolve to use a fret display as a sign of happiness is beyond me. You would not believe the sheer mountain of reports we get almost every day from people thinking a human was threatening them. He let out an exasperated sigh before continuing, his ears stiffening slightly as his mood became a bit more serious.
Now, how is he doing at bonding with your pack?
Rayora couldn't help but lower her ears and sink into herself a little at the words. Jason had been struggling on that front. She knew that. He and Rayora had become instant friends, and he was nothing but friendly and helpful to anyone he met. Her pack enjoyed having him around, but he's having some difficulties with that, she slowly said, in a poorly hidden tone of sadness. Quickly, Lonier quickly raised a hand to stop her before speaking in a reassuring tone.
I figured that might be the case. Don't you worry. That is not your fault. I have to apologize on behalf of the OSI. You should have been told sooner, but with how slow the red tape is moved around here, I myself only just got the memo, right before I messaged you.
Renora's ears perked back up at that. Both them and her eyes now focused squarely on the OOI agent. Memo? Memo about what? She questioned, with a hint of concern tinging her voice.
It's nothing bad, don't worry. It's just a different challenge with its own set of problems,
Lonier reassured her, shifting to a more comfortable position in his chair, before continuing slowly, as if choosing his words carefully as he went.
Some humans, much like some of us, have issues with socializing.
He paused, his eyes looking around distantly, as if searching for the right words to say.
Some of them are born with wiring differences in their brain, much like you have, that makes them more adverse to social integration.
It was true. Raynora kept to herself much more than the average Pomanti, but she was still a well-bonded member of a pack. Of course, her condition wasn't that unusual. Species all over have similar issues as well. Before she could ask for clarification, Lonier continued.
However, with Jason, I'm afraid the issue is slightly more complicated. As you know, humans can form incredibly strong bonds with their packmates, regardless of species. The strength of that bond is what makes them so unique and interesting. Many humans would readily throw themselves in harm's way if it meant protecting their packmate.
Lonier paused, his eyes narrowing a bit as his tone grew even more serious.
As you know, such a bond being broken can have lasting psychological effects on our people. Previously, we didn't yet have the data on how humans react to and handle the emotional stress of such a bond being broken.
What Lonier was saying at clicked in her mind, and she couldn't stop the feeling of sadness suddenly tightening her chest. I understand what you are getting at, Raynora began, keeping her voice level. But Jason seems fine. He's always happy and smiling. He interacts with everyone just fine, and I've yet to see him treat anyone with distrust or show any of the other normal signs of a broken bond.
Ah, that's just the thing.
He tapped his data slate with a claw a few times.
According to this memo directly from Earth, humans, when they want to, are exceptionally good at hiding what they are feeling from those around them.
He paused to take a sip of whatever liquid was in the mug on his desk before continuing.
To sum up everything this says, humans are strong enough to keep themselves together and present a calm and even happy facade, regardless of their current emotional state. Even as their mental and emotional state begins to deteriorate under the weight of it, they will keep it to themselves. They would rather break under the load than burden their packmates with it.
The room fell silent. Rayora had lowered her gaze to the floor, and her eyes twitched back and forth, as if hunting for something. The worry and sadness in her had only grown as Lornaire spoke. Mentally going through her memories, trying to look for any signs she might have missed. Her ears dropped a bit as she looked back up at Lornaire, having remembered a single thing. He spoke before she could say anything, as he read her body language like a book.
I'm guessing you noticed something.
One day I came back to the den from work early. Jason was the only one there, and he was his usual cheery self. But for a split second before he noticed me, I noticed something odd in his facial expression. At first I just wrote it off as him being bored or tired after a long day himself, but now that you told me what you have... Rayora let the sentence hang there. Lornaire had clasped his hands together on his desk, intertwining his clawed digits together. He sat staring contemplatively at them for a moment, before lifting his gaze back up to her. His voice had fallen into a soft and comforting cadence, like a father giving advice.
Okay, you notice something is off, that's good enough for me. Don't let your mind work itself up over it, though. Nothing will be changing, and he will stay right where he is with your pack. However, we should try to help him. Normally for this type of issue, I suggest having the entire pack get with him, to show him that he's not alone in this, but, this memo specifically says to avoid that. Apparently humans that have closed themselves off like this tend to feel extremely vulnerable when they finally begin to open up. Especially if they have remained closed off for a long time. Everyone trying to be there for him all at once might overwhelm him, and cause him to lock up even harder.
He finally paused for a breath before continuing.
That being said, you are the one he has bonded with the most strongly. If you can get him alone, you might be able to help him open up and realize he doesn't have to suffer alone. I suggest letting your pack know what's going on once you get back to your den, so that they at least know what is going on.
Rayora remained silent for a while. Worry was written all throughout her body language, with her ears drooped to the side, and her tail pressed right to her leg, with only tip wiggled, as she wondered just how much of a burden her friend was carrying, and how long he had been struggling alone with it. Finally, she flicked her ears back up straight and stood, as she gained a sense of determination. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Lornaire. I'm going to try talking to him tonight. He shouldn't have to carry whatever his burden is alone anymore. A pleased expression entered Lornaire's eyes, as he also stood from his desk before making his way to the door.
I was expecting that exact reaction from you. You have my numbers. If anything happens or you think you need help or advice, call, he said to Rayora, as he opened the door for her.
Thank you, Lornaire. I'll be sure to do that, she replied, before striding out of the office. Exiting the building to the busy daytime street, Rayora began making her way towards the nearest suspension rail station. After taking 2 different trains back, Rayora once again walked into her den. Pomanti dens were essentially just large open houses. Bedrooms and bathrooms had walls and doors for privacy. Everything else was in a large open floor communal living area. A pack wasn't necessarily made up of familial relatives. Often it was just a group of unrelated individuals who have formed strong bonds over time with one another. Her pack had around 13 members, including Jason. As soon as she stepped into the den, 4 different sets of eyes turned to look at Rayora. These were quickly followed by 4 different tails waving through the air in happy greeting. She waved her own tail back to them as she made her way towards the kitchen area, where a male Pomanti with mottled tan fur was currently cooking up a large evening meal for everyone.
Hey Rayora, welcome back, he greeted her as she approached.
All 4 of his ears were focused on her, while his eyes remained on the counter, where he was carefully chopping up tubers for the dish.
How did the meeting go?
Hey, thanks, Sorry. It went well. Is Jason here right now? Rayora had kept her voice neutral, but as usual, her packmate was able to pick up instantly on how she was actually feeling. Ori's eye snapped up to hers, and searched them briefly, before he spoke with a hint of concern colouring his voice. "Yeah, he's in his room. He said he was working on a project or something. Is everything okay?" Ori didn't speak loud, but he didn't have to, as Ryora already heard 3 steps of footsteps as the others approached, having also sensed something was amiss. "Well," she began, letting her ears fall back towards her head a bit, as Ori finally took over her body language. "I don't know for sure." Ryora spent the next few minutes bringing the others back up to speed. 2 more of her packmates had arrived back from their respective jobs at this point, and silently listened in without interrupting her. By the time she was done, all of them had varying expressions of sadness. They all desperately wanted to help, but as Ryora had told them, they knew they had to keep their distance for now. "Let the others know as they come back to the den. I'm going to go talk to him. I don't know how long this will take, so don't wait to eat on our account." Ori flicked his ears in acknowledgement, not knowing what to say, before returning to his meal preparation. The others also began returning to what they were doing, one of them breaking off to go inform a packmate that had just arrived at the den of what was happening. Ryora walked towards the back of the den where the bedrooms were located. Making her way over to Jason's door, she reached up to knock. Before she could, however, the door swung open to reveal a surprised-looking human. He was shorter than her by almost 2 heads. Shaggy, black-brown hair was combed back, and the thin darkening of stubble highlighted the lower half of his face. His brown eyes looking up into her orange ones. Quickly, that familiar, ever-present smile spread back across her friend's face. "Oh, hey Ryora. Great timing. I was just coming to check if you were back." His eyes quickly danced around, no doubt quickly looking over her body language. His smile faded only slightly, as he looked back up and into her eyes with concern. "Is everything okay? What did Ossie want?" She quickly nodded her head in a borrowed human gesture. "Yeah, don't worry. Everything is fine. Nothing is changing and no one is in trouble, but we do need to talk." Jason's smile faded a bit more, but he stepped aside to allow her into his room. As she passed him, he closed the door behind her and followed her deeper inside. It was dimly lit by a half-shuttered window on the far wall. A desk in the corner was covered in books, notes, and numerous electronics projects in various states of completion or abandonment. A few of what humans called posters were stuck to the walls in various spots. After they were about halfway in the room, close to his bed against the side wall, she turned to look down at him. As worried as she was about what was to come, she didn't let it show right away more than she already had. "So," Ryora awkwardly began, her voice as casual as possible, "how are you feeling?" As soon as she asked, something in his posture changed, like he had subconsciously tensed up ever so slightly. Though his smile grew larger once more, and he sounded just about as cheerful as ever. "Oh, I'm feeling fine. Tired because I tossed and turned all night, but that's nothing to worry about." She took that moment to sit down on the edge of Jason's bed. After a few seconds, he decided to sit next to her. Looking over at him, Ryora intently studied his face. Her ears were locked forward onto him. Returning her gaze without saying a word, Jason simply remained smiling and waited for her to say whatever it was she had to say. "Are you sure? You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" "Yeah, I'm good. Just tired is all. I'll be fine tomorrow," he said, before looking away and at the wall across from the bed. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The whole time her expression slowly softened as she stopped trying to keep her emotions out of her body language. Her ears drooped to the side, and the tip of her tail stilled. Her gaze slowly filled with sadness as she felt for her friend. "Jason," she said softly, and slowly, much like a mother might while trying to calm their child. She might as well have slapped him from the reaction he had. His head snapped back around to look at her. As soon as he saw her body language and eyes, a rapid series of emotions ran through his eyes. Confusion, concern, surprise, and finally fear. The smile dropped entirely from his face as his mouth opened. "Jason," she said again, in the same tone of voice, this time lifting a clawed hand up to rest on his shoulder. "It's okay. You don't have to be strong." Jason suddenly jerked away from her and stood, taking a step back from the bed. His eyes were locked on her with a mixture of fear and pain as he quickly stammered in a wobbling voice. No, shut up, I'm fine, I'm okay." A single footstep was heard somewhere outside the room's door when he raised his voice, but that was it. Without another word, Rayora stood up. Reaching out, she grabbed his shoulders and slid her arms around his back, hugging him firmly against her. He struggled and tried to pull away for a moment, but quickly gave up. She felt a wet spot growing in her fur, as he began quietly sobbing into her chest. With careful steps, she pulled him back towards the bed, and they both fell onto it. I'm here. You don't have to be strong anymore, just let it all out," she softly whispered to Jason, refusing to let him go. His racking sobs were now strong enough to shake both of them. Years of bottled-up emotions worked their way out of him. They laid there for almost 2 hours, and never once did Rayora loosen her hug from him. Eventually, she could feel his sobbing slow to a stop. His breathing became slow and steady once more as, exhausted and emotionally drained, he fell asleep right there in her arms.